The bailiff stopped mid-step. The court reporter lifted her fingers off the keys. Even the ceiling fans seemed to slow. And in the middle of all that stillness, Terence Owell kept talking. That was the thing about Terence. He always kept talking. Nadine Owell had built her career the way most people build houses, one deliberate piece at a time, starting from the ground, checking every joint before moving upward. She had graduated from Howard University at 22 with a degree in civil engineering, worked her first job drafting bridge support schematics for a firm in Baltimore that paid her 60% of what they paid her white male counterparts, said nothing, kept working, got licensed, got recruited, and by 38 was running infrastructure assessments for the state of Maryland's Department of Transportation. By 51, she was the deputy director of that department. Her name was on 2 federal grant approvals that most people in Annapolis didn't even know existed. She just drove a 10-year-old Volvo. She kept a garden on the side of her house in Catonsville. She made her mother's cornbread recipe every Thanksgiving, even when no one was coming. She did not talk about what she had. She just had it. Terence had spotted her at a fundraiser for a children's hospital when she was 44. He was standing by the silent auction table, holding a glass of wine he hadn't paid for, wearing a blazer that fit well enough to suggest money without confirming it. He was charming in the way men are charming when they have decided to be charming at someone, deliberate, focused, slightly too warm. He asked her what she did. She told him. He tilted his head and said he'd always admired women in engineering, which was the kind of sentence that sounds like a compliment if you don't examine it. She examined it later. By then, she had already given him her number. They were married 14 months after that fundraiser. Terence sold commercial real estate, or had, before the market softened. By the time they married, he had 2 deals pending and a lot of confidence about what was coming. Nadine was not naive. She noticed things. She noticed that he moved into her house rather than them finding a new one together. She noticed that his name appeared on her joint account faster than she had expected. She noticed that when she mentioned the Volvo needed new tires, he drove her car to the dealership and came home with a lease agreement for an SUV she had not chosen. She told herself these were small things. She told herself she was being too analytical, too critical, too much the engineer looking for structural failures in something that was supposed to feel good. She told herself Terence was adjusting. Everyone adjusts. What she did not tell herself, not yet, was that he had already started. It started quietly, the way these things always do, a comment about her friends. You know, Renee doesn't really have your best interests at heart, right? A suggestion about her schedule. You work too hard, baby. Why are you always at that office on weekends? A shift in how he referred to her job. First it was your work, then your department thing. Then one evening over dinner it became that government job, said the way you'd say that old car, like it was only still around because no one had gotten around to replacing it. She kept working. She always kept working. The financial piece came later, which is how it usually goes. Terence had explained early in their marriage that he was restructuring his business model, pivoting toward investment properties. He needed a bridge loan. She gave it to him. Then there was a property deal that required a cash deposit to hold. Then his car needed repairs. Not the SUV she was leasing, his car, a BMW he'd brought into the marriage. Then there was a conference in Charlotte he needed to attend to stay connected in his field. She paid for all of it. Not because she had no choice, but because every request came wrapped in the kind of logic that's hard to argue with in the moment. He always had reasons. Terence was very good with reasons. What he was not good with was anything that made him feel small, and Nadine, without ever intending to, made him feel small simply by existing. She didn't mean to. She never announced her accomplishments. She never compared them. But people called the house asking for Deputy Director Owell. Her photograph appeared in Maryland's Infrastructure Quarterly. Her colleagues sent her emails she'd sometimes read at the kitchen table, and even though she never narrated them, he would catch the subject lines. Congratulations, award, appointment. The state gave her a commendation in October of their 3rd year. She brought it home in a manila envelope and put it in the filing cabinet. She didn't mention it at dinner. He found it 3 days later when he was looking for the car insurance documents. He didn't say anything then, but something changed. Something that had been simmering quietly turned up a degree or two. By their 4th year, the comments had a different edge. You think your title makes you better than everyone. You walk around like I should be grateful you let me live here. I put up with a lot, Nadine, more than you know. She would go still when he said these things. Not frozen, she was never frozen, but still in the way a person goes, still when they are deciding very carefully what to say and what not to say. She had learned by then that some responses made things worse. She had also learned something she had not expected to learn, that she was afraid of him, not physically, not yet, but in the way that matters more long-term. She was afraid of what he would say next, and the day after that, and the day after that. She finally told her sister in March of year 5. Her sister, whose name was Lorene, drove from Philadelphia that same weekend and sat at Nadine's kitchen table for 4 hours. She did not offer advice. She listened. She made tea. At the end of the 4 hours, she said, "You have been keeping that man's secret for 5 years, and it is not yours to keep." Nadine filed for divorce 6 weeks later. Terence did not take it quietly. He hired a lawyer named Sloan, not one of the particularly good ones, but one of the aggressive ones, which is sometimes what men like Terence want more than competence. He counterfiled for spousal support. He claimed that Nadine had controlled the finances throughout the marriage. He claimed emotional neglect. He claimed that her professional demands had created an environment of psychological harm for him. He filed the paperwork with the kind of confidence that comes from having spent 5 years watching someone absorb your behavior and say nothing. He had mistaken her silence for acceptance. He had made that error for 5 years. He was about to make it publicly. The courtroom in Anne Arundel County was not dramatic by design. Wood paneling that had seen better years. Fluorescent lights that hummed if you listened for them. The gallery was half full. A few observers, a court officer near the door, a young woman near the back who appeared to be taking notes in a small yellow legal pad. Nadine sat at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal blazer she had worn to a conference in 2019 and had not needed to replace because she took care of her things. Her attorney was a woman named Gail Purcell. Quiet, precise, the kind of lawyer whose effectiveness only becomes obvious after she has already won. Terence arrived 5 minutes late with Sloan, who was loud in the way people are loud when they want the room to feel their presence before they've earned it. Terence wore a new suit. Nadine clocked it immediately. The cut, the lapels, the way it sat on him. She had been married to him long enough to know when he was performing. The judge, a man named Harker, mid-60s, reading glasses perpetually on the edge of his nose, called the session to order and reminded both counselors to keep their clients within the decorum appropriate to the court. Sloan smiled. Terence straightened. It began as these things often begin: financial disclosures, asset lists, the sterile language of things that were once shared and are now being divided. Gail moved through Nadine's documentation with the unhurried confidence of someone who had already reviewed every number 3 times. Terence's contributions to the household, his earnings over the marriage, the properties he had claimed to be developing, none of which had materialized, the money that had moved from Nadine's personal account to his business account, $63,000 over 4 years, documented, dated, categorized. Terence held himself together during that portion, barely. Then Gail called Nadine to the stand. She asked about the marriage. Not in the way that's designed to hurt, in the way that's designed to show a pattern. Nadine answered evenly, her hands folded in her lap, her voice the same as it was in infrastructure meetings and budget reviews and every professional context where she had spent decades learning to speak without emotion, not because she didn't have it, but because she had learned that emotion was the first thing men like Terence used against women like her. Sloan cross-examined. He was probing for what he thought was her weak point, the accusation that she had been emotionally withholding, that she had prioritized her career over the marriage, that her success had been wielded as a weapon. Nadine answered each question, simply, directly, without ornamentation. And then Terence, who had been watching all of this from the defendant's table with the particular tension of a man who had decided he was being made to look small in public, leaned over and said something to Sloan. Sloan put a hand on his arm. Terrence said it again, louder. Sloan said, "Terrence." Terrence stood up. "She acts like she built something," he said. His voice was not a courtroom voice. It was the voice Nadine knew from the kitchen, from the hallway at midnight, from 5 years of closed doors. That's what she does. She performs. For everybody. The award plaques, the title, it's all a performance. You want to know what she is? I'll tell you what she is. Judge Harker said, "Mr. Owell, she's nothing without that job. Nothing. I lived with her for 5 years, and I am telling this court, she is worthless. A career in a building doesn't make you something. A title doesn't make you something. You think that department keeps you because you're special? You're a checkbox, Nadine. That's all you've ever been. That's all you've ever been. A checkbox with a corner office." The bailiff took a step forward. Gail Purcell set her pen down on the table with the particular quietness of someone who has decided the other side has just done her work for her. Nadine did not move. She sat in the witness chair, with her hands still folded, and her face arranged in an expression that was not anger, and was not hurt, and was not satisfaction. It was something harder than all three of those things. It was the look of a woman who had already made peace with exactly who she was dealing with and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. Harker was speaking. Some combination of counselor, control your client, and a warning about contempt. But Terrence was not done. You want to call witnesses. Call them. Call everyone who watched her use me. Call everyone who saw her treat me like I was her assistant. I supported this woman, Mr. Owell. Harker's voice had changed register, not louder, but harder. Sit down, now. Sloan pulled Terrence's arm. Terrence shook him off. And that was the moment, that exact moment, the back door of the courtroom opened. She did not enter dramatically. That was the thing. She didn't need to. Dr. Eunice Carmichael walked through the door the way she walked through every room, with the measured, unhurried pace of a woman who had been making rooms pay attention to her for 30 years without ever having to ask. She was 63 years old, wore a dark coat over a suit the color of deep water, and carried a leather portfolio that had been resoled twice. Her hair was silver at the temples. She had driven 2 hours from Washington, D.C. that morning, arriving at the courthouse before Nadine's team, sitting in the corridor outside on a wooden bench, reading from a slim paperback, waiting. She was not Nadine's mother. She was something else. Eunice Carmichael had been a professor of structural systems engineering at the University of Maryland for 19 years before her appointment to the National Infrastructure Advisory Council, where she had served under 3 administrations. She was the first Black woman to chair that body. She was also, in a way that did not appear on any official record, but was understood by everyone in Nadine's professional world, the reason Nadine had gotten her first real shot, because 20 years ago, when Nadine was 28 and had been passed over for a project lead position in favor of a man with fewer qualifications, Eunice had written a 2-page letter to the Maryland DOT director that had not been a suggestion. Nadine had never asked her to do it. She hadn't known it was happening until after. Eunice had been watching Nadine's career ever since the way certain people watch, not closely, not loudly, just faithfully. She slid into a seat in the gallery without announcing herself. The court officer glanced at her. A woman near the back, the one with the yellow legal pad, looked up and looked again. Sloan, who was still managing Terrence's elbow, did not notice. Terrence noticed. He didn't know who she was, but he felt the shift, the way the room recalibrated around a new presence. He turned to look. He saw an older woman, composed, watching him. He turned back. "Terrence," Sloan said quietly. "Sit down, please." Terrence sat. Gail Purcell resumed her examination. She asked Nadine 3 more questions. Each one invited Nadine to describe, calmly, chronologically, without editorializing, specific incidents. A particular evening in 2021 when Terrence had thrown a set of car keys at the kitchen wall. A phone call she had recorded in 2022, which she had not told Terrence she was recording, in which he had told her she was too dumb to know what a real man's patience looks like. a text exchange from 2023 in which he had written, in the context of her having attended a professional dinner without him. "You embarrass yourself every time you walk into a room with people who actually matter." The phone was admitted into evidence. The text exchange was admitted into evidence. The date and timestamps were noted for the record. Sloan objected to 2 of the 3. Harker overruled both. Then Gale called her witness. The woman with the yellow legal pad stood up. Her name was Dr. Ren Ibarra. She was an organizational psychologist from Johns Hopkins. She had been retained not by Gale's office, but had approached them. She explained on the stand because she had been conducting research on workplace-adjacent intimate partner coercion patterns in professional women and had encountered Nadine's case through a referral. She was not a character witness. She was a pattern witness. She described, using the clinical vocabulary of her field, the documented sequence of behaviors Terence had exhibited over 5 years. She did not call him a name. She did not raise her voice. She described what was in the record and explained what the research said about it. Terence's knee was bouncing under the table. Sloan put a hand on it. Terence pulled his knee away. When Dr. Ibarra stepped down, Gale turned to face the court and said she had no further witnesses. Sloan, who had been slightly off balance since Terence's outburst, stood and said the defense intended to call Mr. Owell to testify in his own behalf. Harker said that was his right. Terence walked to the witness stand with the posture of a man who had been waiting for this part, who believed in some structural way that once he was given the stand and the chance to speak uninterrupted, the whole thing would turn. He spoke for 11 minutes. In those 11 minutes, he described Nadine as cold, calculating, and career-obsessed. He said she had never once prioritized the marriage. He said she kept him financially dependent while publicly demeaning him. He said she had turned her colleagues against him. He said, and this was the part that made the court reporter stop typing for 2 full seconds before continuing, that she had made him feel like something she kept in a drawer. Gale waited until he was finished. Then she stood. "Mr. Owell," she said, "how much money did you earn in 2021? Terence said he had been restructuring. "That's not what I asked." "What did you earn?" Overruled. Terence named a number. Gale placed a document in front of him, his 2021 tax return. The number he had named and the number on the return did not match. She did not comment on the discrepancy. She placed a second document beside it, a summary of transfers from Nadine's personal account to his business account for that same year. She let him read it. She let the room read it. Who supported this household financially for the majority of this marriage? Terence said it wasn't that simple. "I'm asking you to answer the question as asked." "She did," he said. The words came out the way words come out when a man has spent 5 years building a story about himself and just watched it collapse in front of a room full of strangers. The recess came at 2:15. Nadine stood in the corridor outside the courtroom. Her sister Lorene was there, had been there all morning, sitting in the gallery, not saying anything, just being present in the way that matters. Lorene handed her a bottle of water. Nadine held it without drinking. Eunice Carmichael came to stand beside her. "You did well," she said. Nadine said, "I didn't do anything." "That's exactly right," Eunice said. "And you had to practice for years to learn how to do nothing when someone was trying to make you do something." They stood there for a moment in the fluorescent light of the county courthouse hallway. 2 women who had both, in different contexts and at different points, been the only person in the room who looked like them and were expected to be grateful for the opportunity. Lorene offered Eunice the extra coffee she'd bought. Eunice accepted it. When court resumed, Judge Harker took approximately 12 minutes to deliver his findings. He awarded Nadine the marital home, which she had owned prior to the marriage and had continued to pay the mortgage on throughout it. He declined Terence's claim for spousal support, citing the financial record and noting that the evidence presented demonstrated a pattern of economic dependence that had been voluntarily assumed rather than imposed. He noted, without editorializing, that the conduct displayed by Mr. Owell earlier in the proceedings had been taken into account in assessing credibility. He did not grant any of Terrence's counterclaims. He did order that the $63,000 be classified as marital debt owed to Nadine. Terrence sat very still through all of this. He did not look at Nadine. He looked at the wood paneling on the opposite wall in the way people look at something when they are not seeing it. Sloan gathered his papers. He said something quietly to Terrence. Terrence nodded once, the way you nod when you aren't processing. Nadine signed where Gail indicated. She shook Gail's hand. She exchanged a brief word with the court reporter, a woman who had been at that bench for 16 years, who said nothing specific but whose expression said something. Nadine understood it. Outside, the afternoon light was doing that particular late autumn thing it does in Maryland. Pale gold, low in the sky, the kind of light that makes ordinary parking lots look briefly significant. Lorene linked her arm through Nadine's as they walked. That man stood up in a courtroom, Lorene said, and told a judge, 2 lawyers, a bailiff, a psychologist, and the record of these United States that you were nothing. Do you understand what I am saying to you? Nadine said she understood. And what happened? Nadine thought about the court reporter's fingers stopping. The bailiff's mid-step pause. The way the room had rearranged itself around a man's outburst, and then, calmly, gone on without him. The record disagreed with him, she said. Lorene made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. Behind them, Eunice Carmichael was speaking to Dr. Ibarra near the courthouse steps. 2 researchers discussing methodology, apparently, something about a follow-up publication. Neither of them looked back at the building. There is something worth saying about the silence Nadine had kept for 5 years. People ask, and they will ask, if you've lived anything like this, why she didn't leave sooner, why she didn't speak up sooner, why she didn't, at some point, give him exactly what he gave her. The answer is complicated, and also not complicated. She was protecting something. Not herself, not only herself. She was protecting the architecture of a life she had built over 30 years, brick by careful brick, and she was not willing to let anyone, not a court, not a bad marriage, not a man with grievances and a new suit, detonate it from the outside. She would decide when it came down. She would decide the terms. She had decided. What Terrence never understood in all 5 years of their marriage was that her silence was not the silence of someone who had nothing to say. It was the silence of someone who had already decided what she was worth and was waiting for the rest of the room to figure it out. They did. They always do. The drive back to Catonsville took 40 minutes in light traffic. Nadine turned on the radio, something quiet and instrumental, the kind of station that doesn't announce what it's playing. She drove past the spot on Route 40 where the old bridge had been replaced in 2018, a project she had signed off on, had walked the site for, had argued budget line items over in meetings that ran past 7 in the evening. The new bridge was nothing special to look at. It did not need to be. It just needed to hold. She pulled into her driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet car in the fading afternoon light. Then she went inside. She had cornbread to make.